Thank you very much. My name is Tim Chambers. I'm the alternate UK delegate to the Pdco, and I'm a recently retired paediatrician and nephrologist from the city of Bristol, which is about 200 kilometres west of here. And it's my pleasure to chair the sort of winding up session. It's a session that's going to send you home buzzing with ideas, or going home thinking, well, really, was that 2 days well spent? And I hope that it's going to be the former rather than the latter, but it will only be the former if you all contribute to the sort of summing up process that we will do at the end. My back of the envelope calculations are that we're starting at just before 12, which is nice. A brief, I'll roughly halve the length of time that we have for the various contributions in order to, my strict instructions, and as an alternate member of PDCO, I do what I'm told, and my strict instructions are to finish at 1:15. So if I do nothing else, you will be out by 1:15. So first of all, I have to provide some sort of leadership on identifying the meeting outcomes. And being a clinician, I've come here because I've got involved in this because I treat children, and the children and their welfare and the public health of children is the central point of what we all should be about. And I'm sure what we all are all about. And it's the consultation between the child, the family, and the doctor, which may result in the prescription of a medicine, which will be like a comet, will have a huge tail, a very long tail in terms of its duration, from the point of somebody having the idea, prompted perhaps by a clinician, frustrated at not being able to give a certain treatment, the idea, and then the comet's tail, and then me actually writing out a prescription for the child. And I think we've got to keep that relationship very much in mind in our discussions and in what we take out of it. What would the children of Europe think was the outcome? Would they think that we were having a worthwhile 2 days? So please bear that in mind. The second point is that when I leave a conference, then I have to usually write out a CPD form for my continuing professional development, and part of that is a section on reflection, and part of that is this going to change my practice? And I hope that at the end of this conference that one of the things that you will take away thinking it was worthwhile is, yes, this is going to change my practice, and it may be at 2, perhaps even more levels, but the 2 levels I've plucked out of the air are the practical one of what should I do, and one of the practical suggestions that we have just heard is maybe facilitating the attendance of members of ethics committees at the PDCO to hear how the discussion goes and to hear how the PDCO forms its first level advice, which is going to be then translated into detailed protocols and clinical trials. And the second is a more strategic one, how I think. And of course, the one I would like to pluck out of the air is about involvement of children and young people. A huge concept. It's not something I can go away and do now, such as make arrangements for the ethics committees to come to PDCO, but it's something that I recognize there's been a change in how society views children and young people, and how they expect to be viewed, and how we're going to incorporate that into our thinking. So if we go back to the start of the meeting was about ethical considerations for paediatric trials. How can ethics committees in the European member states and the Pdco at the European Medicines Agency work together? And the working together is for the welfare of children. And the subheading was on working on the ethical aspects of the design and conduct of clinical trials with the pediatric population for medicine development. And moving to the agenda, you will see that will be we will be evolving our points for action, strategic, practical, through a plenary discussion, which is going to consist of Petra, Ines, Marek and Peter Helms. So I hope they're all within my range of vision, and also, of course, involving the members of the plenary group coming from your various areas of interest and activity. And we are given 4 bullet points to try and work our way through. What do ECs want to see in a PIP? What do ECs want to see in current guidance? Would ECs want assistance, and if yes, where and how? And practical steps for information exchange, which I think mostly cover the points that came out of the 4-party discussions that we have just had. Although perhaps if I were being very critical, I would say that it is very much what do EC wants from us. In other words, what can you learn from us? Whereas I think one of the things I take back from the last 2 days is how much I have learnt from the Ethics Committee's representatives themselves, from industry, and from the other stakeholders, the clinicians, the academics who are actually going to be doing the research. So shall we start off with that approach and start with the first question, which was, what do ECs want to see in a PIP? And Petra, perhaps you could lead off.
ECs, what do they want to see in a PIP? I would like to change the question into what do ECs want to see in a trial which they have to approve? And there it would be helpful if, yes, we had in an executive summary all the issues which we have to approve, summarized, that we can see they had been considered by the applicant of this trial. Because very often it is like this, we invite them and ask them the typical questions. What is the threshold of burden? Why didn't you define it? How could you minimize more? And all these things. And it would help, I think, if the Pdco could give the sponsors some checklists. These are the issues which you have to consider for each clinical trial when you hand it in for approval. So that there's not so much education needed in every approval of a clinical trial. We always invite them, we talk to them, and often they didn't know all the aspects which we have to check for our approval. I also think it would be very, very, helpful if ethics committee members could participate in Pdco or pediatric committee meetings, not to interfere, only to learn. And I think it would also be very educative if pediatric committee members who have not worked in an ethics committee before could also maybe be invited to participate there. I think it is so eye-opening if you can be in the life situation and understand the constraints ethics committees have.
Thank you very much, and I particularly like your two-way approach to it. That is very important. Ines, would you like to add anything? Peter.
I mean, just for a matter of information, does Pdco allow observers in on invitation to observe a meeting at the moment? And do you have a list of those kind of individuals who can be permitted to sit in on a meeting?
I think Agnes is going to respond.
We cannot accept observers from under certain conditions, because of course what we discuss is confidential, and therefore there would be some condition attached to the participation. But in terms of education, I think it doesn't need to be a specific protocol. It can be, it's more the exercise and the reflection, which is the educational tool rather than the specific data. So probably we could accept some observers but we need to agree at the agency level. This ideas as a brainstorming. So we need to see in practice how we can do it. But I don't think it would be a problem. And we have actually had a number of observers already in the PDCO.
So there are hurdles, but the important thing is not to let a hurdle become an obstacle.
Yes, exactly.
Is it not? Yeah. So
just on the other, going into ethics committees, we've heard that there are a number of countries that have national pediatric committee, or a committee which reviews the predominant majority. Obviously, you'd need to have there may be a language issue there, but it would be very helpful to know which countries have those and who on the PDCO who can speak that language fluently might be an appropriate person to be an observer on one of those, for example.
So your question was to what countries have a national committee that look at pediatric, not clinical ethics, but research ethics. So can I to the floor? Yes, Ines.
The Netherlands has.
Yes.
And we also have probably a confidentiality issue, which might be quite complicated, but I think it would be really helpful. And I also think that it would be helpful not only to go to the PDCO, but that different ethics committees, national ones, could be a guest at the other national committees. I think that could be very interesting considering the differences, because what I keep struggling with is where is it, you know, a difference of interpretation and where are really serious different value judgments at stake. And I think it would be very helpful to find out if these national committees would also allow each other to, you know, to get more insight in the arguments.
So I think we've got the Netherlands and we've got Germany. Any other national pediatric committees known about? Well, maybe that's a piece of work in progress that we should be looking at, and that would be relatively easy, I guess, to find out. Any comments from North America about this, about facilitating observers into discussions that might be seen as confidential or sensitive?
You know, our structure is a little bit different, and so we do have a pediatric committee, which is called the Pediatric Review Committee that establishes our plans. We have had observers in there, and the same sort of confidentiality restrictions with signatures and appropriate the like. I mean, we have academics pass through who get laundered by the confidentiality approach, et cetera. So that, I mean, there's nothing, again, hurdles, but not necessarily obstacles. But our process is very different. If you observe our committee, we're dealing at a much higher level of abstraction because many of the issues that pertain to what an ethics committee would want to know are dealt with at the protocol level in individual divisions. So this distinction between the that was pointed out in one of our discussions between what the Pdco does and then what actually happens in the protocol is even more accentuated in our setting given the organizational structure of the FDA.
Thank you. Any reactions from industry to these sort of discussions that are going on now about improving the relationship between ethics committees and the EMA Pdco? Yes.
Yeah, this is partly from industry and partly from being involved with a different committee within that advises the federal government on ethics. And there are some committees such as the Secretary's Advisory Committee on Human Research Protections in the United States that have as their responsibility, amongst other things, trying to address pediatric issues and also trying to harmonize across different agencies, because we have, one of the things that's been discovered is that not only do we have different ethics standards to some extent, or regulations across different parts of the country, how people interpret things, but even within our federal government, different sections of the government may have different rules regarding ethics in depending upon how much of what's called the common rule they decide to implement. There might be an opportunity to have some dialogue between SACHARP or other advisory committees. There are other committees that are out there, and the European committees, and that's something that might be worth exploring. And I'd be happy to try and communicate, put somebody here in touch with our chair who deals with those things. In terms of the industry perspective, I mean, I think we would love to see more discussion and more information on what are some of the differences, you know, how the definitions for the common language vary from one country to another. I think that could be useful.
Sorry, any other contributions from the floor? No? Marek, you're a panel member. Have you got anything you want to add to it?
Yes, but I'm thinking about the, you know, the how we can exchange this flow information or information flow, and my one worry is related to the transparency. We have the full transparency of our work. All our opinions of the Pdco are published. I am not sure if the same transparency is applied to the ethics committees. How many ethics committees publish their decisions? Because it will be also important for us, for the Pdco, to know what are the results of the ethics committee works. And I think in many European countries, the decision of the ethics committees are not published yet.
Thank you. So you're looking for a closure of the loop.
Yeah.
So can we have perhaps some representatives of ethics committees on that proposition? Is that something? Did you publish your? Yes, please.
There is. I'm from Poland. Up to now, there is no obligation for a public ethics committee opinion, but of course it's transparent because every applicant has a rationale of the opinion. So,
Thank you. Sorry, you want to come back, Marek?
Yeah, but if we are talking about the full transparency, that means there is a public access. We have the public access to the decisions of the Pdco. In near future, we'll get the full access, public access to the UJCT, the Registry of Clinical Trials. So I think that the same rules should be applied also for the decisions of the ethics committees. It will be, as I mentioned this, I underline the value of this issue because I think that it will be also useful for us, for the people involved in the assessment of the clinical trials or PIPs.
I think this is very much contributing to education, isn't it? I mean, using your analogy, you might say, well, the Pdco decisions are transmitted direct to industry and we don't tell anybody else. And I think that's an approach that we're not wanting to perpetuate. Any other contributions from ethics committees? Yes.
The issue of transparency is one that I've thought about, and let me suggest maybe a lower hanging fruit that would be still, I think, controversial, which is the degree to which ethics committees that have reviewed the same protocol, that their decisions are transparent to each other. To where within even the confidentiality agreement of protecting that protocol, often the research ethics committees don't know. They might know, well, they don't know what other committees have done, or they might be told that other committees have approved it and why don't you, et cetera. So a lower hanging fruit would be, and I actually view that as a sponsor obligation, and there's no regulation that would require you to do that except under certain circumstances in U.S. law. But there's nothing to say that if you're the fourth ethics committee to review something, you shouldn't have some idea of what the previous three did.
Petra?
Yeah. My first thought was, oh, data protection. When we have a committee meeting and we have a guest, this guest must sign an agreement of confidentiality, even if it is the president of our chamber of physicians, if he wants to see what an ethics committee does. So we always thought it is highly secret because we have to protect the sponsor. Yeah. So I think it would be very educational to us to hear how other committees have decided. What we get are previous decisions, but usually it's handed in at the same time in other countries, so we never get these. It would be very interesting to see that, and I think also from a data protection view, there should not be a problem to hand it not only back to the competent authorities in our country, but of course also to EMA. That should not be a problem, and we would learn a lot if we knew the others.
Agnes?
Yeah, maybe a clarification there. There are several levels of confidentiality. The confidentiality of the data is under the TRIPS agreement based on the fact that normally data are confidential unless there is overriding public health interest. And I think making the case for pediatric trial, which may apply to other population to meet your ID, would be maybe a start saying, we feel this is important to avoid unnecessary trials and we need to have this information. Second, as you said, there is no confidentiality between competent authorities. We work with them as a network in Europe, so in principle we share confidential information. The personal data protection is another matter, but this is not what we're discussing here, so that again that would not be a problem. And I had another idea, we'll come back later.
Thank you. There was a question over there.
It's a comment. I would just say that the Danish National Committee currently publish a summary of the trials that had been approved or dismissed in the National Committee. We are an appeal committee, so we don't see that much, so many trials. But and the regional committees, they don't do the same. But I think it must be an aim to do it. And we do it in a way that we don't break the confidentiality. And I think I'm very agree with that. It's very important that the committee system also is very transparent.
Thank you. And presumably you report to the Danish government, do you? You're accountable to your group, your committee?
Oh yes, we do it annually, but we are independent. But we is in a way established by the Ministry of Health and Prevention.
Because it did occur to me that some ethics committees might be governed by superior bodies that might have a view about how much transparency there should be.
But we have had no problem doing this.
Thank you, Agnes. You remembered your fourth point.
Yes, that was the other point was that when we have established Udracity and the data in Udracity that will become public, the main reason for refusing a trial for ethical reasons should be made public, and that should be so. It is in relation to a request for an authorization of a clinical trial. If an ethics committee refuses a trial, this reason should be made public. So the basis is already there for making this data public, and I think we could probably implement it in a better way.
Petra.
Yeah, just in addition to the Danish comment, I think the exchange on the national base is not the complicated one. We know what is done in Germany, but what would be very interesting is the results of multinational studies and the approvals in the other nations.
Thank you very much, Martha.
I would make a plea for a generic form of rationale that can be used by ethics committees while they get used to the idea of transparency. And I would also make a plea that acceptance, I'd like to know as much the rationale for acceptance of certain trials as rejection.
Yes, there's a comment over there.
Yeah, just a quick comment. There are some countries that will request all of the ethical opinions from all of the countries that have reviewed the protocol before they do. So I don't see why there should be an issue with... Okay, Petra's going to...
Petra.
Please, just to that. Yes, in our law it says all approvals which have taken there before must be handed in. It is very rare that we get these, and it would be also very educational to get all the approvals after that. Okay?
Right.
We hardly get anything from other countries, not before, not afterwards.
So I think if I would generally sum up the first bullet point, what ECs want to see in a PIP is very much the reasoning, the rationale behind the thinking that went into the opinions that were given in the PIP. Why was it our opinion that this number of blood tests needs to be done, or this scan, or so forth? And the second is that somehow the loop should be closed, and that the decisions of the ethics committees could be fed back to the EMA and Pdco. So I think that's quite a useful, there is some practical there, and there is some thinking there, which is just what we want. Can we then move on to the second bullet point? What do ethics committees want to see in current guidance? Ralph, just clarify, current guidance being?
Yeah, the existing scientific guidelines which have been published so far, and you might have noticed that there have been recent initiatives for many of the guidelines in therapeutic areas to add pediatric-specific recommendations. So we, at the agency, do have some scientific guidelines that are ready for pediatric disease only, but many are now being added. Maybe, Danielle, you have a good overview from that, but there is this initiative to really provide, after a consultation process, additional guidance for pediatrics. Now, that is only related to how to do certain non-clinical clinical development. So we wanted to ask this question in a general way, just to say we are very open to make sure that the guidance really reflects the important points that you are seen often as a hotspot missing in protocols, not being properly addressed.
Well, perhaps the first question is, are the ethics committees aware of the guidelines?
I say no.
No? Ines?
Yes, sorry. Yeah. Not all of them, but
No.
the Dutch one definitely is.
And somewhere, someone wanted to say, yes.
Just taking this point, as Dr. Knupfer yesterday said, the subsidiarity is a very important principle from an ethical point of view and also from a legal point of view. And some of the guidance, for example, I remember the guidance or guidelines for blood substitutions. They recommend, for example, to use adolescents in the same group as adults. And without having any data, this is certainly a problem because it's illegal, and a guidance which recommends something which is not in conform with the legal regulations is certainly always a conflict.
Thank you. And when the guidelines, perhaps who should I ask this question about guidelines? Can I ask Ralph? When they are being drawn up, I mean, I've been involved in one recently which has extended the guideline on medicines to promote bladder stability and continence. And there were general guidelines, and now an add-on section is being prepared for children and young people. Now, is there an ethical dimension to that, or is that taken, are the various members of Pdco who contribute to it assumed to take the ethics into account, or what?
Certainly, I think this was this is important. As for the summary report, that the guidelines maybe used to be rather directive and not really provide reasoning or even references. That has changed. So guidelines are now being drawn up by explaining, by providing reasoning by making reference to existing information and data and trying to synthesize this. And I think, therefore, it would be also due work to include ethical considerations when, in particular, there is a question at which point in time can the first pediatric studies be done. So it is definitely possible. Again, I recognize that previous guidelines may not have been addressing this explicitly.
We'll take Danielle and then Marek.
Also to draw the attention that the guidelines are always for 6 months in consultation several times, so that I'm also sometimes a little disappointed that the pediatric world in general, not only scientists, but it's open for consultation for any citizen of Europe, do not comment. So I'm a little surprised by the illegality of a guideline that has not been noticed by anybody, but just mentioned today. It has been, in the public domain for comments during 6 months, and as I said, probably several times. But it's important to be noted.
So let's make it clear: the guidelines, as they're being formulated, are available through the EMA.
The draft guidelines.
The draft guidelines. Yeah.
Several, yeah.
So they are already available. Francis, I'll take your point in a minute. And just Marek, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, it was exactly the same impression that each draft is going for the public consultations, and there is a fantastic opportunity to comment.
Right, thank you. Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the point, it's very interesting to think about the therapeutic-specific guidelines and ethical considerations, but I think right at the start of our meeting yesterday, Agnes mentioned a review of the EMA's overall guideline on ethical considerations in paediatric studies. I think that would be a wonderful opportunity to get some input today from those from ethics committees about what they'd like to see the scope of that guideline covering, and if there's any updates from Agnes or Ralph on the timing for that as well, that would be helpful.
Thank you very much. On the specific point about timing, do you have any information?
No, this is currently not open. It is has been published by the ad hoc group, but we wanted this meeting to understand whether this is useful, what is lacking, what is missing. We heard, Petra, you saying, well, it's too long. We need to also have some practical approaches here. There was mentioning of a checklist and so on. So although this guideline already has in the annex some tabulations and trying to provide a checklist approach, maybe there's some need to make it more useful in practical terms, but we were interested, of course, in the discussions. Is there also some content need? Is it blind? Does it miss to spot something? For instance, biobanking is not at all addressed because we have some reasons to, as you said, recognize it's a separate matter, but maybe there's some other things that could go in there. We would then make the suggestion and promote it.
Well, thank you for that question. I think that's a very important aide-memoire for the EMA. Yes.
Yeah, Francis Crowley. No, I just want to repeat what we had said in our neonates discussion there. It could be helpful to have a joint guideline maybe on exploratory clinical trials in children, first in man, first in child studies there, where there's no foreseen therapeutic benefit, no aimed at therapeutic benefit. So that could be a very helpful kind of guidance that I think Pdco could help us with.
Reaction?
No immediate reaction. I agree with you. That would be interesting, quite a hard job to do, but let's think about it. Why not? Yeah.
Can I ask the Ethics Committee representatives, were you all aware of this consultation process with the guidelines, that they are available and that every citizen in Europe can comment on them?
And beyond.
And beyond.
It's not only Europe.
Not only Europe.
You told me to stick to Europe, Ralph, so I'm sticking to Europe. Yes.
I have to admit that I was not aware of that, but I think when we discuss that, one has also to keep in mind how ethics committees are organized. I think in most countries it's an honorary work. So, for example, in Germany, it's all honorary. We are in the lucky situation that we have a permanent working party of research ethics committees where all work together, but it's still voluntary, and we do not have a full-time employee. So there are many German laws and ordinances prepared, be it radiation protection, medical research, be it a new GCP ordinance, things like that. We have to comment on this. Then there is in Brussels the ad hoc group on clinical trials preparing the revision of the clinical trials directive with a couple of public consultation papers. Then we comment on that. But given that the ethics committee, in our country at least, are feeling independent of each other, we have to have a back and forward procedure to get our official statements accepted by the members. That means the 53 ethics committees, so to speak. And that is almost more than we can achieve. And now there are others. Council of Europe does public consultations. And that's it. It's not manageable. I have to admit that. Even a large country like Germany is not in a position really to comment on the multitude of sometimes contradictory, overlapping, and guideline drafts and so on. It's not feasible. I have to admit that.
Well, I'm sure the EMA would not wish to add. I take your point that, and we should. What are the ethics of getting people who are doing things voluntarily to work even harder and feel even more guilty when they don't deliver on time? But there surely should be some. Just to know something's on the website is I know many things are on the website I should know about, but I don't know about them unless I have a prompt. And is there some method of getting a prompt to ethics committees that a new guideline is on the website?
Yes, we can certainly do that. So that was one of the questions we had raised in the survey, because it can readily be done. It's already possible now. You can subscribe to these electronic information sends out, and we will maybe send this to you just to make it more convenient to spot this, and we can make sure that you will then receive information on new guidelines out for consultation and new ones that have maybe now finished consultation, new PIPs. That is generally possible. It wouldn't solve the problem with dealing with it in a way, but I'm thinking, Dr. Haswood, your comment, of course, refers to the current situation, which is that there are 27 plus 3 member states, and that there are lots of ethics committees in there, and everyone doing individually the job, some having some coordination. You have this working group, Netherlands has central authority, but maybe there's also a point in thinking, could there be some more structure, some work sharing in that respect, so that once you would have a sort of forum where you discuss and exchange, as has been suggested, then it would also be easier to comment and do additional overhead shaping the environment for yourself. What fora would be of your interest?
Yeah. So, any other comments on this and on guidelines and guidance? Anything we could be doing better? Yes, Martha.
Just one on assistance. As a professor, I know that a lot of young people who are fascinated, interested, and want to have maybe even careers in ethics and research ethics in particular, you might want to, when you're talking about assistance to ethics committees and why they don't have time to answer questionnaires and why they're overwhelmed with requests for consultation and opinions on Council of Europe and the rest of it, that you might want to develop some sort of program for a young cohort of academic secretariats that could do internships by preparing these and attending these meetings and preparing summaries that could be exchanged and could serve all committees equally to be mutually informed. It's a tremendous development opportunity. That's how I got involved in research ethics. I was an academic secretary while doing a PhD, and that was it. And I was introduced to a world where and internships and so on were made possible by agencies, federal and international, to do that kind of work for ethics committees. And it's something to think about, the next generation being involved in this.
Perhaps I can ask, is there a door in this huge building which I can go to, which will have on it ethics? I can knock on the door and talk to people in the EMA who are involved in ethical thinking, or is it hardwired in the DNA of everybody who works in the agency?
I don't know much about DNA, so I'm not sure, and I don't want to go. No, unfortunately, we don't have such a door, but it is indeed that we have certainly recognized at the European Medicines Agency, at the occasion of proposing this workshop to happen, that it has been, this is a cross-agency topic. It is of similar importance to colleagues working in the sector evaluating medicines when now, of course, completed trials have to be looked at. It is also, as we heard yesterday from representatives, also considered by the scientific advice. And of course, there may be sometimes situations where you have several potentially valid study strategies, and then the scientific advice would not necessarily draw on the ethics to make the final recommendation, but say this depends on some factors that you may need to discuss also with ethics committees. So I would really say it is a cross-agency topic, just to summarize this, and I guess also depending on the outcome of this meeting, we can further develop on it. So this meeting could strengthen the way we provide opportunities for you and the way we could work on it. It really depends also on what you are calling for, and also if we can have corresponding partners in that matter, so that it doesn't take another year or 2 years to convene a workshop and then promote, but that something happens until then.
Right, thank you. Is that you leading me into the third bullet point, which is, would ECs want assistance, and if yes, where and how? Is that's really what you were just saying? So, Ines, do you need assistance? If yes, where and how? Here's your opportunity.
I'm a past member, I admit it, that. I very much like Bartha's idea on the education of young people. I think that in the long term, that would really provide a good existence for ethics committees as well. I'm afraid that we had such a project approved, I mean, highly rated but not funded at the EU, which is, I'm afraid, kind of symptomatic for how people look at this, and also at this multidisciplinary kind of project, because this involved social scientists who are going to look at what children feel. It involved members of ethics committees. It involved lawyers who are going to look at the regulation and see if that could be simplified. So I think the idea is really good. If we could have any assistance from your part to argue that those high in the regulatory framework would appreciate that, and that it's not a sort of a silly hobby of academics, that would really, I think, be very helpful.
Thank you. Petra?
Another very concrete assistance would be, and we had talked about this yesterday and today it was said, that in addition to the investigators brochure, it would be very helpful to know or to get a list of all ongoing trials with this investigational product. Sometimes we are a little bit in the blind, in the fog. We don't know what is going on beside of this trial. It would help us to position this trial in the overall field, and the same summary of a PIP.
Daniel.
No, I think it's a good point. I understood that most of the time you see the trial and the study as such, but not the PIP as a whole. Would you see the whole program? I will not say that maybe not everything would be included, but I think what you would like to see would be included.
Well summarized. Yes.
Okay.
Simplify. Yes, well, let's hear from, yes.
Just one remark to support the suggestion from the Canadian colleague. We work together with Canada and the Netherlands, the Pediatric Association of the Netherlands, in a training program called Tulips, training upcoming leaders in pediatrics. That program involves all kind of training in research, and also the CCMO, our central committee, is involved there. If we could use this kind of structure and expand it to some other countries and bring in the young people, because these are the people of the future, and link it up with the kind of work which is happening here. If there would be some money available for that. We also work towards young people being future leaders in METCs, which is a major problem, because as in Germany, also in the Netherlands, although we pay people to sit on METCs, the money does not go to the persons who sit there, but it goes to the department and very often does not benefit the persons themselves, so they do it in their free time.
Thank you. Any other comments from Ethics Committee representatives here about general what assistance? What could the EMA do to make your life easier, happier, simpler? Or have we covered it? I think we possibly have. Yeah, okay. Yes?
Well, maybe we can simply say what could be also on offer. I think you've seen today, unfortunately, it didn't happen for 2 meeting rooms, but we are hosting a number of meetings. And so we are hosting groups that are not actually part of the European Medicines Agency. I'm just flagging that I see that the UCROF has a pediatric working group and that the EFGCP has a pediatric working group. And if there would be interest to create a working group that is maybe dedicated to pediatrics, but coming from ethics committees, there are opportunities to support practical matters, which I think is very readily and easily done. So that could be hosting something is always a possibility. I would also take your point on the standardized representation of a pediatric protocol. So maybe have a fact sheet and an overview. We were already thinking, Agnes and I, about sort of a pediatric template that focuses on the elements that you really want to see maybe on the front page to highlight, what are the particular burdens and risk and all the other elements. And that we actually have already published on that, and Agnes has made a proposal for a Concert C that covers these elements. So there are some, you have worked on this and EOA has worked on it. Maybe it can be put together to really help then also various stakeholders to put something that makes it very clear. We make all the discussion processes more efficient, and there could be several roads. So you choose.
Right. I think we should, I think the discussion, I sense, is beginning to crystallize. So shall we move to the last bullet point, which is practical steps for information exchange? And I think I would see this perhaps as an open forum. Going back to my original comment, that are you going to go away from this meeting with buzzing with ideas, with things that you'd like to see changed, or are you going to go away thinking, perhaps not? So if you want to be the former, then let the EMA, let's have your ideas on how we can make the relationship between the EMA and ECs even more constructive. But let's put the panel on the spot and ask them to All right, well, no, one volunteer is worth 2 best persons.
When you're working on position papers or policy papers or advising government or trying to even obtain funding through FP7s or whatever, it's really important to have documentation that is not your own publications, that actually stress the importance of not only pediatric research, but also the ethics of pediatric research and the particularities of clinical trials in the pediatric domain. We're lacking a lot of we're not lacking so much guidelines. So the guidelines, I think, do need to be revisited and maybe simplified and biobanks added or whatever. We're lacking publicly available high-level documents, such as from the EMA, that actually put forward the case for the specificity of this area and the particular policy issues that are raised. You will not find ethics committees addressing these issues or researchers doing research on them to try and help you answer the questions, or policy researchers as well, unless we can show that this is an important area. And we need that kind of background, high-level documentation from official agencies such as the EMEA. Otherwise, they just think it's a professor asking for, their particular pet project or whatever. So it's very important to move things forward to have that.
Thank you. Ines?
Well, I think it belongs to my age to repeat oneself, but I want to draw the attention again to the other vulnerable groups, because I think that's really important. And if there is any, if there could be any link to other groups who maybe have the same problems and who also have to argue for the importance of research being done, I think that would help the case for pediatric research as well. Another very practical, but eminently practical thing is, could we have a list of email addresses of those present today, so that at least for us, it's easy to exchange information. It's also part of my age that I always lose any business cards that I get, so don't count on me sending you anything, but could we have such a list?
Surely you would have to get permission from all the participants listed. And maybe, could it be arranged that on the table outside, if people are going to leave straight away or going to have something to eat first, that you could sign a yes or no? Are you happy for your email to be distributed, your email address? Because we have a list of names and what we all represent here, but not email addresses. But, you know, we must respect confidentiality. I mean, people...
Is it possible to set something up quickly? As people leave, they sign up yes, no. Because, of course, you'll have their email addresses, presumably, from registration. Okay. Any other suggestions, Peter?
Just one about what happens from now onwards. I would strongly advocate for an ethics forum hosted at the EMA in much the same way as the network of research centres across Europe is hosted here. It isn't owned by the EMA. It's owned by, it would be owned by the ethics chairs or representatives, but it would be hosted here, if the agency would be prepared to do that.
And could you give us some terms of reference? I mean, it sounds like a very good idea, and who would criticise it, but what would it actually do? What would the child in Europe think I'm benefiting from by having an ethics forum?
Well,
devil's advocate slightly.
It would be up to a dialogue between the agency here and the representatives of ethics committees to develop those criteria. What would be, how frequency any meetings would be arranged, or what would be the aims and objectives of such a group. You know, just thinking off the top of my head, the aims and objectives I would include something like to improve the ethical opinions across Europe. I wouldn't put in the word harmonise, because, you know, that we want to improve the quality of ethics opinions across Europe,
right.
And to ultimately improve access of children to participation in highly in ethical studies, something along those lines.
Yep,
I mean, there may be others, but two or three bullet points to describe that the aims and objectives would be.
I've put you slightly on the point, on the spot, and thank you very much. Is that something that the representatives of the ethics committees would feel was constructive? Would they come? Yes, one.
I'd just ask at this point is if it would be interesting to have representatives of scientific societies, pediatric associations or so, as well as perhaps industry present at these discussions, because these are issues that are cross-cutting, and it could be beneficial to try to have a common platform on the ethical issues here.
Right. So support, but qualified by bring more people to the party because you'll get more out of it. Is that right? Yes.
There is a resolution to that, I think, which the network of networks has resolved. It has a 2-day meeting here, hosted at the agency. Now, this is going to cost some money, so there is a resource issue here for the agency to consider how this will be done. But what happens is, on the first day, all partners come: industry, patient groups, professional societies who want to come, networks themselves. But on the second day, it is only the networks who are present. So you see what I mean? In this case, it would be, you would have a day when all partners, including chairs of ethics or ethics representatives, would be. But on the second day, it would be ethics only. And the argument for the reason why the network of networks has done this is because we wanted to be able to have discussions on our own and not be influenced necessarily by advocates from industry or other groups, because we need to respect our autonomy, our individual. And I would think for ethics committees that's vital. You know, you are, as ethics committees, acting as guardians to safeguard children from unsafe procedures. or discomfort, are risky things. So you do need to retain your independence.
Now, we did have in our group 4, we had an eloquent contribution from a clinician who actually has to recruit the patients and do the trial. I mean, is that something that the clinicians would want to contribute to as well? I don't hear anyone say no. So, but then we run into the risk of getting all these 6, 7 stakeholders, and where would it end? But that's for the EMA to sort out. Petra.
Yeah, I wanted to add, this is a good idea if one could do such meetings. At the European Forum of Good Clinical Practice, we have started to do difficult cases workshops where we invite ethics committees and we go with them through difficult cases. And it is interesting to see that the others have the same problems, and it is interesting to see how they resolve it. The problem, Timothy asked, do they come? It's always a question of time and money.
Right, that's like death and taxation, isn't it? Yes, Bertha.
I think to be mutually worthwhile, to perhaps do something very concrete rather than one, either maybe work through the common rationales for different kinds of trials or elements or points to consider. Another approach would be to say, let's take the ethical considerations and revisit them together. So always have it with a very practical, usable outcome. That would be my recommendation.
And perhaps start simple and feel your way rather than going in and having a huge jamboree that really doesn't work. Yes.
Can I make a plea about this aversion about industry representation? I have been an individual who has practiced in academia. I've written protocols, I've enrolled patients. I've been on the industry side, and I've sat on an IRB for 3.5 years as a pediatric representative. I could understand you not asking the industry to host the meeting, because that apparently has, connotations that are potentially problematic. But industry representatives are, one, they're very interested in hearing how the ethics committees review their protocols. And having sat on an IRB and reviewed industry trials and then subsequently helped write them in the future, and seen studies that have been written by academic physicians, I will tell you that the industry studies are usually written a lot better, that they often have a lot more thought process into the ethical considerations of the trials, because they get advice from a lot of people, and they know that they have to get these trials through multiple ethics committees. So I think their representation at these meetings would be very important. One, they hear how the ethics committee view the studies, and they can also give the industry view of the fact that they have to, from their perspective, harmonize these studies across multiple regions, and not just the EU, not just the United States, but multiple regions where there are varying ethical considerations that need to be addressed. So I just want to make that plea, because I hear too much of this, and having been in all those worlds, I think there has to be some balance that has to be put in here, and not this often aversion to having industry represented as somehow this will taint the process.
I think, Ralph, you found your first speaker for the first meeting of this ethics forum. I think it would be a very interesting lecture that many of us who think we know what industry does in this area may have a lot to learn. Thank you.
Can I say my suggestion was inclusive? There's no exclusion of any interested parties, but the suggestion was there is a part of the meeting which is closed for ethics chairs or representatives, but the meeting is open to everybody. all interested parties come and contribute and share experiences. That's extremely valuable. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Right, thank you. I think we are, sorry, Ralph, yes.
Maybe our question to you, and maybe that was a too strong suggestion, was: is there such a need to maybe provide for facilities to host, and would you want to be looking into a pediatric focus group maybe as ethics? It's a bit not the first step, but one of the later steps, and we identified some topics that we can work on without meeting, and that can be certainly done, particularly when we can share the email addresses. So maybe we benefit from looking at the first steps to take more than maybe eventually what could be later meetings here. But nevertheless, I think interaction in public would be worthwhile. And instead of maybe having own meetings, it would also be possible that there is a meeting point at scientific and academia meetings. It is true that the Pdco members and EMA have been requested and are attending many academia meetings in the last years to explain the pediatric regulation, to explain the thinking, the experience, and so on. And I think maybe this is also an opportunity for members working on ethics committees to also join in there and have a sort of reflection on principles and experiences that will, directly target also those young investigators maybe. So maybe we can join in these meetings and not just being the regulators on the spot, but also then sharing the overall need to discuss matters. Not our own meeting, but go somewhere.
Good. Right. Any other points that members of members of the group want to raise? Any other take-home messages they want to give to the EMA or to industry or to ethics committees before we wind up? I think there was early on yesterday. There was an interesting contribution about the Clinical Trials Directive and the ethics that is the new Clinical Trials Directive going to have a strong ethics element to it. And I can't remember the answer. I hope the answer to that is yes, but is it at the stage of formulation or?
No, I think the answer was saying that there will be, to our understanding, not a major change in how ethics is being addressed at the moment. So expecting the first draft from the Commission, this may be one of the other topics that really deserve concerted consultation and comments by ethics committees. So that would be what I understood to really argue the case, how ethics should be developed in the clinical directive revision.
Good.
Barta, sorry.
Yes, equally for the review of the data protection directive that is currently being revisited, the 1995 one here in Europe. Children and minors are all consent, privacy issues, data exchange is all in there. And if it's not, it should be.
Good. Any other contributions? I'm going home as a Pdco member, resolved next week when we have a three-day meeting to scrutinize the applications even more rigorously for their ethics content. Would the content be something that the ethics committee would be able to get a handle on? We have argued for more openness, for giving reasons for the decisions that are taken, for setting up a forum, for developing educational opportunities for young researchers, young investigators, to get a flavor of how the Pdco works, how ethics committees work, and for exchange between ethics committees and the Pdco. Well, that's a pretty reasonable shopping list, I think, Dr. Herold, isn't it? Just start tomorrow.
Yeah, we can.
Start tonight. Well, I'm going to conclude by handing over to Dr. Daniel Prasseur to give his closing remarks and close the meeting. But before I do, may I thank the panel members here who have contributed to this session. It's been most valuable.
Well, thank you, Tim. I think to me it was a very valuable meeting, and I have to thank you all. I've been listening a lot, and I think the purpose was two-sided. On one hand, hopefully to try to explain better to the audience what the Pdco is doing and how the agency, being so supportive, is trying to achieve for the benefit of the children. And on the other hand, also to hear from the ethical committees and all the representatives, and also from industry, what were their expectations from our side, and what on how we could better meet them in some near future. So I also have my own list, you know, of tasks to be addressed in the coming weeks, so that we have to digest all these proposals, all these comments that we heard from you in order to have some kind of action plan in order then to be effective and see that it can turn out to be concrete measures that are helpful for both parties. Is it a forum? Is it an executive summary? Is it any other measure that we also have to take into consideration according to some workload, to some resources? So altogether, I think we have achieved something today, and I'm very grateful to all of you for this. So I wish you all a good trip back home. I know that there are some potential difficulties in traveling, but I also understood it's more, you know, coming in than flying out. So I'm quite sure you will make it. So thanks again.